Yo yo, welcome to Culture Hash. My name's Culture Hash. Today we're going to talk about a new album from Mac Demarco, Here Comes the Cowboy. Here Comes the Cowboy is the fourth studio album from the Canadian singer-songwriter. As suggested by the album's title, there's a fair amount of American folk and Americana on this project. And it comes 2 years after the well-received This Old Dog album. Mac Demarco has a reputation for being a slacker, and the instrumental choices on Here Comes the Cowboy reinforce this perception of Mac. This album features flat drums, languid guitars, and slow to mid-tempo paced tracks. Mac Demarco creates a chilled atmosphere amongst these folk rocky sort of sounds that he employs. Mac Demarco created controversy when he announced the title of Here Comes the Cowboy. People pointed out the similarity of the album's title with last year's Mitski project, Be The Cowboy. This controversy was further inflamed when Mac Demarco announced that Nobody was the title of the lead single from this album, something that we also saw on the Mitski project. I understand where this controversy came from and people feeling that Mac Demarco has stolen ideas of Mitski, but the two albums couldn't be more distinct. Mitski's Be The Cowboy is experimental pop. It was one of the best albums to come out of last year. There's a disco edge to some of the guitars on there, especially seen on tracks like Nobody. I loved Mitski's use of synthesizers, and I thought there was some brilliant experimentation with pop tropes on the album. Whereas Mac Demarco's Here Comes the Cowboy lacks the imagination of Mitski's project. You can't compare these two projects because of how distinct they sound from each other. For the record, Mac Demarco insists that the similarity of his album title with Mitski's is purely a coincidence, as is his decision to call his lead single Nobody. And Mac Demarco's lack of imagination can be seen especially clearly on Nobody, the second track on Here Comes the Cowboy. Nobody is a slow ballad with a super minimal instrumentation, primarily featuring an acoustic guitar. Whereas Mitski's version of Nobody is just driving, it's got some great synths, some disco-inspired guitars, completely different from the Mac Demarco track of the same title, and far exceeds it in terms of quality. And this small-scale comparison just highlights some of the issues I have with Mac Demarco's Here Comes the Cowboy. These issues are apparent from the opening self-titled track. The instrumentation is led by an acoustic guitar, very much gloomy Americana, and over the top of this, Mac Demarco just says, "Here comes the cowboy," just over and over again, just repeating this phrase for 3 minutes, and then the track ends. This repetitive lyric and instrumentation choice makes this track feel very inane and is a poor way to start the album. Here Comes the Cowboy features too many of these drab and dour tracks. There's a lot more experimentation in the first half of the project, but there's a shift towards the end of the acoustic ballad Preoccupied. The track ends with an extended period of silence that makes you think that the album's over, before jumping head in to the track Choo Choo. Choo Choo's got funky guitars and again features some nonsensical lyrics. It opens with these vibrant, funky guitars, definitely takes a bit of disco influence on this track. But again, the lyrics feel very silly. It's just Mac Demarco going, "Choo choo, come and ride with me." And it makes the track feel a bit silly. Feels like the track's a bit of a joke. These are pretty much the only lyrics on Choo Choo. But for the most part, this track's fun. It certainly jolted me awake because after about 5 tracks that all sounded quite similar, Choo Choo stands out because it's a bit different and is a bit more fun compared to what has come previously on the album. The silence at the end of Preoccupied signifies a shift in the second half of this album, which is a bit more upbeat and less experimental than the first half. The more enjoyable moments on Here Comes the Cowboy certainly feature on the second half of the album, like the smooth bass riff and catchy chorus on Heart to Heart, and the throwback psychedelic feel of All Our Yesterdays. All Our Yesterdays is probably the best track on this album. I love the textured guitar riff on here, and I really enjoyed Mac's masterful control of the tempo and pace of this track, which builds really nicely towards the second half of the track. The album closes quite nicely with Baby Bye Bye. I quite like how this track just has bye bye. I quite like it. It's a bit like saying goodbye to the audience. And so the first half of the track is just him going bye bye. Whereas in the second half, there's a bit of a extended instrumental outro here. It feels jazz inspired as Mac Demarco scats over the instrumental, as there's quite a few instrumental flourishes towards the end here. Overall, I felt like Here Comes the Cowboy was decent. There were some nice tracks on here like All Our Yesterdays and Baby Bye Bye, but the majority of this album is quite dour, quite uninspiring and unoriginal really. I think Mac Demarco creates a nice soundscape and there's good consistency throughout. The project feels chilled and mellow, but there aren't enough gripping moments on here, and I feel like some of these silly songs are a bit of a waste of time really. But I also feel like Mac shows some good personality on here. You can tell he's having fun with this record as well. I much preferred the second half after some of the unsuccessful experimentation of the first 4 or 5 tracks. I did find the majority of Here Comes the Cowboy quite mediocre. So for me, Here Comes the Cowboy, Mac Demarco, is worthy of 5 out of 10.